The antique silverware glinted under the warm light of Aunt Margaret's farmhouse chandelier, casting soft reflections across the polished oak table. It was one of those family dinners steeped in tradition and quiet judgment. My cousin Savannah raised her champagne flute and tapped it lightly with a knife. "Everyone, I have some exciting news." She beamed her southern drawl, smooth and confident. "I've been invited to interview for Vice President of Strategy at Rainier & Locke." A hush fell, just like always when Savannah spoke. Even Uncle Harold froze mid-carve his knife, suspended over the turkey breast. Rainier & Locke, the crown jewel of West Coast finance. Savannah smiled like she already had the job. "The CEO asked for me personally," she added, tossing her blonde curls like it was a movie scene. They all cheered. I stayed quiet. At 41, I'd mastered the art of being invisible. But in this family's silence never went unnoticed. "What is it you do again, Emily?" Aunt Margaret asked sweetly, already halfway to a smirk. I swallowed my irritation. "I run a private equity firm." "Oh," Savannah giggled. "You mean your little online thing?" I smiled politely. But in my mind, I was already preparing for tomorrow when Savannah would walk into my office. I didn't answer right away, just kept slicing my roast chicken in silence while the laughter floated around me like perfume I never asked to wear. My fork scraped the plate. My cousin, now basking in their praise, had no idea that 2 floors above where she'd be interviewing next week, my name sat on the corner office door in etched glass. Emily Hartman, CEO. They didn't know because they never asked. Not once in 13 years had anyone in my family called to ask what I was building. They dismissed my consulting work as a phase like some late-in-life artistic whim. They smiled when I said private equity, but blinked like I'd said beekeeping. It wasn't always this way. Growing up, Savannah and I were inseparable until the world decided she was the chosen one. She won pageants. I won science fairs. She was accepted to Yale. I took a scholarship at Northwestern and worked 3 jobs to stay. She got handed opportunities. I made mine in silence. Somewhere along the way, I stopped talking about what I did. The less I said, the fewer the smirks. It became easier to disappear. Until tonight. "Emily, you should really think about something more stable." Uncle Harold added, scooping cranberry sauce onto his plate. "You're not getting any younger, sweetheart." I almost laughed. If he knew what I was finalizing this week, a 9-figure acquisition that would land me on the cover of Bloomberg, he might choke on his stuffing. But instead, I just nodded. "You're right. Maybe it's time for a change." Aunt Margaret smiled, proud of what she thought was surrender. Savannah smirked into her wine glass. No one noticed the way I sat a little taller after that, or how my fingers stopped shaking. After dinner, I slipped out quietly and headed back to my townhouse in Queen Anne, another thing they thought I was renting. I parked beneath the building, stepped into the elevator, and pressed PH for the penthouse floor. My penthouse, my building. Inside, I kicked off my heels, poured some chamomile tea, and pulled Savannah's resume from my briefcase. The email it came with still made me grin. Another legacy candidate. Too much charm, not enough substance. Final call is yours, Ms. Hartman. I skimmed her credentials. Strong enough for a second-round interview if I didn't already know the footnotes. Interns she blamed. Reports she took credit for. A career built on glitter and borrowed light. She had no idea she was walking into my world. And in a few days, she'd sit across from me at a boardroom table. She used to joke I'd never reach and address me as ma'am. But first, I had one request to make. I picked up my phone, dialed the extension. "Priya," I said to my assistant when Savannah Langston arrives for her interview next Monday. "Make sure she waits. Half an hour. Let her sit with the headlines a while." There was a pause on the other end, then a chuckle. Absolutely, Miss Hartman. She'll be in good company. I smiled. It was time they all remembered who I was, or rather, finally saw what I'd become. Sleep came slowly that night. I laid awake in my townhouse, the one with a full view of the city skyline, listening to the hum of Seattle below, and wondering not for the first time how long I would have let them believe I was nothing. Maybe forever. Maybe I was content to build in the shadows. It had its peace. No one questioned you. No one asked for anything. And no one expected your success. But something about that dinner, Savannah's smug little toast, my uncle's tired sweetheart voice, it struck a nerve that had never really healed. It wasn't just their dismissal. It was the assumption that I needed their help, that I was still some stray they hadn't gotten around to rescuing. In truth, I'd stopped needing their approval years ago. Around the time I bought the firm Savannah thought she'd waltz into, it was a quiet deal, deliberate. Layers of shell corporations, third-party buyouts, silence clauses. I didn't want credit. I wanted control. And I had it. The next morning, I walked into headquarters before sunrise. The place smelled like clean ambition, fresh coffee, steel glass power. I nodded to security, stepped into the private elevator, and took it to the 32nd floor. My floor. Inside my office, the skyline stretched out like a painting. My desk sat bathed in soft morning light, its surface clean except for Savannah's file, which I'd placed dead center. I stood there for a moment, just looking at it, not out of pettiness, out of mourning maybe, mourning all the versions of myself I'd swallowed to keep their love, or maybe to earn it. I sat down, pulled open her file, and started marking notes in the margins, not to sabotage, just to be thorough. I hold everyone to the same standard, even the cousin who used to call me the family freelancer. Around 10 a.m., Priya knocked and stepped in holding a thick manila envelope. "Morning," she said. "Background report on Savannah Langston. You'll want to see this." She handed it to me, then lingered. "You sure you're okay going through with this?" she asked, softer now. "It's family." I looked up at her and smiled, but not with my eyes. Family doesn't mean blind loyalty. It means accountability if it's real. Priya nodded and left quietly, closing the door. I flipped through the report. Inflated achievements, credits stolen from junior associates, entire campaigns plagiarized from outside consultants. Everything I already suspected. But seeing it all in print, it settled something in my chest. She hadn't just underestimated me. She had played dirty, all while pretending she floated on merit. And now she was about to discover what real merit looked like. I turned in my chair, looking out at the water. Savannah would be here in 3 days. She'd walk through the glass lobby, brushing past magazine covers with my face on them without ever looking up. And then the doors would open. She'd walk into my office, and that's when the real interview would begin. Monday came dressed in silver fog and quiet anticipation. From my corner office, the city looked half asleep, veiled in mist and morning traffic. I'd been at the office since 6:30, sipping black coffee, reviewing reports, trying not to replay the weekend in my head. But I did. Of course I did. Every smile that was a dismissal. Every offhand comment they thought I was too polite to catch. They had no idea that I'd been building a fortress while they were building assumptions. At exactly 8:15, Priya stepped in, tablet in hand, a subtle smirk playing at the corner of her mouth. "She's here," she said. My pulse didn't change. My fingers didn't twitch. But inside something shifted. "How early?" I asked, glancing at the sleek clock on the wall. She showed up at 8:45. Told the front desk she was personally requested by the CEO. I raised an eyebrow. Priya continued. "She's name-dropped half the board already, demanded an oat milk latte, called you my cousin who still works from her laptop." I almost laughed, but it came out as a breath through my nose. Typical Savannah, so busy performing, she still hadn't looked at a single magazine on the wall. "They're all about you, by the way," Priya added. "She's been in front of them for 20 minutes and hasn't looked up once." I nodded. "Let her wait 10 more. Priya chuckled. "Will do, Ms. Hartman." Once she left, I stood slowly and walked over to the glass wall behind my desk. The skyline was beginning to sparkle beneath the lifting fog. From this height, even the most powerful men looked like moving dots. And below, Savannah was sitting in the lobby like a queen waiting to be crowned. She didn't know the script had changed. She didn't realize I'd been the one writing it all along. At 9 hours sharp, my desk phone buzzed. "Miss Langston is here for her interview," Priya said, her voice crisp and calm. I straightened my blazer, turned the nameplate on my desk so it faced forward, and said, "Send her in." The door opened a moment later. Savannah strode in like she owned the place, her heels clicking confidently, her resume folder clutched in a designer handbag. She wore a bold red dress, probably chosen to convey power. Her eyes sparkled with certainty until they landed on me. She froze. The shift in her face was slow, like watching a curtain being pulled back in slow motion. Her mouth opened slightly. Her color drained. "Emily," she said, stunned. What are you doing here?" I didn't move, just folded my hands on the desk. "Good morning, Savannah," I said evenly. "Please have a seat." The air thickened. We were no longer at Aunt Margaret's table. This was my table, my rules. And as Savannah sat down slowly, her fingers twitching around her folder, I smiled. "Let the interview begin." Savannah didn't sit so much as she collapsed into the chair, her body catching up with her shock. Her hands gripped the arms of the leather seat like she was steadying herself in rough water. I'm supposed to meet with the CEO," she stammered. "You are," I said gently. "You're looking at her." She blinked. "No," she said, almost laughing. You're Emily. You consult. You work from home. I own this company," I said, sliding her resume across the desk. "I've owned Rainier and Locke for the last 5 years." The silence between us swelled. She didn't speak, just stared at me, trying to connect the woman she ignored with the empire she had walked into. I could see the questions forming, clashing with all the certainty she'd clung to for years. "I don't understand," she whispered finally. "That's the thing," I said. "You never tried to." Savannah swallowed hard eyes, darting to the walls, finally noticing the framed magazine covers. Forbes, Bloomberg, Fast Company, my name, my face, my story. How she asked, her voice small. I didn't owe her that answer, but I gave it anyway. "While you were climbing ladders others built for you," I said calmly. "I was tearing down broken ones and building my own." She looked away, and for the first time I saw something real pass across her face. Not shame, exactly, more like a flicker of comprehension. The kind that comes when the world stops spinning and finally forces you to look. I opened her file. Pages of bold claims and buzzwords stared up at me like a resume on stage, hoping no one checked the footnotes. "So let's begin," I said, shifting into the tone I used with high-level candidates. "Tell me about your role in doubling your department's revenue last year." Savannah perked up momentarily, regaining her footing. "That was one of my biggest wins," she said quickly. "I led the strategic initiative across 3 regions." I raised a hand. "Before you continue, I should tell you we already conducted a full audit." Her voice caught mid-sentence. I turned to the printed report and tapped the page. "According to internal feedback, the strategy you described was developed by your junior team, one you originally vetoed." The color drained from her cheeks. You've been digging into me," she asked, trying to sound offended, but the fear in her voice was louder. "I dig into all executive applicants," I replied. "Rainier and Locke runs on integrity. No exceptions. A knock at the door interrupted the moment. Priya stepped in, tablet in hand. "Ms. Hartman," she said, her tone clipped. "Your aunt and uncle just arrived downstairs. They're demanding to see you." Savannah froze. Of course they came. "Send them up," I said calmly. Savannah turned to me, her voice cracking. "Emily, please." About last night, about everything I said, I held up a hand. "We'll get to that," I said, my voice cool and steady. "But first, let's finish your interview." And for once, she didn't say a word. The silence between us grew dense. Savannah's shoulders, once square with performance confidence, had begun to fold in. I could see her rehearsing excuses in her mind, mentally editing the version of herself she'd always presented. I gave her none of the cues she was used to, no softening, no rescuing. Instead, I opened the folder again. "Let's talk about this award you listed," I said, tapping a line on her resume. "The West Coast Regional Marketing Excellence Trophy." Savannah sat up straighter, trying to recover. "That was for a cross-platform campaign I managed last spring. Our team hit 160% of projected growth." I nodded slowly. "Interesting, because our investigation found that the campaign belonged to an external vendor. The original pitch was submitted months before you joined the team. It was approved and running before your first day." She blinked. Her mouth opened, but no words came. "I also spoke to 2 former supervisors," I added, tone still calm. "Neither could verify your lead role." Savannah sat in stunned silence, hands trembling slightly. Her eyes fell to her lap. Then came a soft knock at the door. Priya stepped in. "Ms. Hartman, your aunt and uncle are on their way up." Savannah's head snapped toward the door, her voice cracking. "Emily, wait. Please, let me explain. Save it." I said, sharper now, but not unkind. "I'm not interested in apologies born out of panic." She lowered her eyes again, finally speechless. Moments later, the door burst open. Uncle Harold stormed in, Aunt Margaret behind him, her silk scarf clutched tightly in her hand like a shield. "Emily, what the hell is going on here?" my uncle barked. "Why is Savannah sitting here like a criminal?" I didn't rise from my seat. "I was just reviewing her application," I replied coolly. "You're welcome to join us." My aunt blinked, confused. "You reviewing? Why would you be?" She trailed off as her gaze finally landed on the nameplate at the edge of my desk. Her mouth moved, but no sound came. I stood slowly. "Welcome to Rainier and Locke," I said. "The firm you like to brag about at dinner parties. The one Savannah applied to. The company I've led for the last 5 years." Their faces shifted in unison, shock, disbelief. Then something deeper. Recognition. "This can't be," Aunt Margaret whispered, as she stepped closer, hand to her chest. "You run this every line," I said. "Every acquisition, every turnaround. The consulting firm you all laughed at. That was just the foundation." Uncle Harold's mouth twitched, unsure whether to be proud or defensive. "Why didn't you tell us?" I looked at him, a lifetime of being overlooked, wrapped in one steady glance. "I did," I said. "You just never listened." And before anyone could respond, I pressed the button on my desk. The frosted glass behind me faded to clear, revealing a panoramic display of charts, news headlines, and my leadership records. Silence fell again, but this time it belonged to me. They stood frozen, like statues caught in the middle of a storm they didn't see coming. Behind me, the screen quietly rotated through headlines. "Emily Hartman reshapes Wall Street's future." The quiet CEO behind Rainier and Locke's meteoric rise. Private, powerful, unapologetic. My aunt sank into one of the leather chairs, her eyes locked on the screen, like it was showing a ghost. You were behind all this?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," I replied calmly, walking slowly around the desk. "The firms you thought I was freelancing for, I was buying them, rebuilding them, leading them. Savannah sat stiffly, still silent. My uncle paced by the window, running a hand over his jaw. This is all so dramatic," he muttered. "Couldn't we have handled this privately like a family?" I stopped in my tracks. "Privately," I echoed. "Like the dinners where you mocked my work, the years you offered to find me something stable. You humiliated me in public for a decade, and now you want discretion." His eyes narrowed. "You're enjoying this." "No," I said, my voice steady but heavy. "I'm not. This isn't revenge. It's correction." A sharp silence fell. Even the city traffic outside felt hushed. I turned back to Savannah. "I've spoken to your past employers, your peers, the people you stepped on to look impressive. This resume is a polished mirror, but it's not the truth." Savannah's face flushed crimson. "I didn't mean to what I interrupted, to mislead, to coast on charm while others carried the weight, to keep me small so you could feel big." Her mouth opened, then closed again. My aunt leaned forward, hands clasped, voice softer now. "Emily, surely there's another way to handle this. We're still family. Don't let this divide us." I looked at her carefully. There was fear in her eyes, but not for Savannah, for their image, their legacy, the perfect family narrative unraveling in real time. "Family requires more than shared blood," I said. "It requires respect, and I haven't seen any of that from you in years." The room fell quiet again. Then Priya knocked gently and entered with a thick manila folder. She handed it to me without a word. I opened it, flipped through a few pages, and let the silence build. "This is the full background review," I said, placing it on the desk. "It includes falsified achievements, complaints of bullying, and intellectual property violations." Savannah's breath caught. Most of it was buried. I added, not looking at her. "Thanks to your father's legal team, but I don't bury misconduct." Uncle Harold stepped forward, tone suddenly clipped and professional. "Emily, let's discuss this privately. There's no need to escalate things." I looked him dead in the eye. "You already escalated it," I said. "When you taught her, she could lie her way to the top." Then I pressed a button on my phone. "Harold," I said, "please join us." The door opened, and in stepped my general counsel. "Let's talk about consequences." Harold Bennett stepped into the room with a calm, practiced authority that always steadied me. He wasn't just our general counsel. He was my safeguard, the last filter between emotion and execution. He nodded politely to the room, then turned to me. "Ms. Hartman," he said, "shall I begin?" I gave a single nod. He turned to Savannah, whose face had gone pale. Her hands clutched the arms of her chair like a lifeline. "Miss Langston Harold began our findings indicate significant discrepancies in your executive application. Inflated job titles, plagiarized campaign content, and multiple unverifiable achievements." He spoke without malice, just facts, clean clinical truth. In accordance with company policy, he continued submitting falsified credentials, is grounds for immediate disqualification, and may carry legal consequences, especially in executive-level roles. My uncle opened his mouth, but Harold raised a hand. "This is not personal," he said. "This is corporate governance, and it applies equally to every applicant." Savannah blinked rapidly. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "You wouldn't actually do this." "I'm your cousin Emily. We grew up together." I looked at her carefully. "No," I said softly. "We didn't. I grew. You stayed where it was safe. You climbed ladders other people built and called it ambition. I built foundations from scratch and called it survival." Tears welled in her eyes, not the performative kind I'd seen for years, but real ones, heavy, honest, the kind that come when the story you believed about yourself finally collapses. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I didn't know you were this." "That's the thing," I replied. "You never tried to." A long silence stretched between us, the kind that only comes when the last illusion has shattered. Then my aunt spoke, her voice trembling. "Emily, please, we were wrong. All these years we underestimated you. But this, do you really want to break the family over it?" I turned to her. "I didn't break the family," I said. "You did every time you chose appearances over truth, every time you taught her that charm was more important than character, every time you laughed at me for doing the work." My uncle's jaw clenched. "We were trying to help you." "No," I said gently. "You were trying to fit me into your version of success. I was never asking for help. I just wanted to be seen." And then, for the first time in years, I felt something lift. Not victory, not vengeance, something else, relief. I looked around the room, the faces that once made me feel small, now uncertain, quiet, exposed. This was no longer about Savannah or even my aunt and uncle. It was about me. And the girl I used to be, the one they overlooked, the one they dismissed, was finally standing tall with nothing left to prove. I stepped back behind my desk and glanced at the old family photo tucked into the corner drawer. I had become everything they never expected, and yet somehow, everything I always knew I could be. A week later, the office was quiet again. The headlines faded. The legal reviews filed the last echoes of that day, stored where they belonged in the past. I stood by the window of my corner office watching the Seattle skyline glow in the late afternoon light. Below me, the world moved on, but inside, something had settled. Something long buried had finally exhaled. I didn't feel angry anymore. Not toward Savannah, not even toward my aunt and uncle, just done. Some betrayals don't come with knives. They come with laughter, with polite dismissals, with years of being overlooked by people who should have seen you first. And yet here I stood, not broken, but rebuilt. Not spiteful, but whole. I pulled open my drawer and looked again at the photo of my grandfather, his kind eyes staring back, with the quiet confidence of someone who always knew I'd rise. And I had. Because loyalty without respect is just guilt wearing a nice suit. And betrayal, when met with truth, becomes the soil for rebirth. Sometimes the people who doubt you the loudest are the ones closest to you. But you don't need their permission to grow. Let your strength be silent until it's undeniable. Build, rise, become. If this story touched something in you, drop a comment below. Share your own journey. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that honor quiet strength, real courage, and the victories no one saw coming. Your comeback deserves to be heard.